Thank you. So is everybody having a good conference so far? Well, that's good. Well, I'm about to make it worse. I'm looking. Well, what are we here talking about as sales, how to sell something? Let me ask you, how many of you sell something? Raise your hand. Okay, those of you who didn't raise your hand, you probably need to, because everybody sells something to someone. Give me words that describe a salesperson. Just throw up words that describe a salesperson that normally you encounter. Okay? Adjectives. Slick. Pushy. Listens. Oh, so we got the slick, pushy person who listens, right? What else? What? Talkative. Knowledgeable. So pushy, knowledgeable people. That's pretty interesting. Slick. Other words? Sensitive. Personable. But did you see where the audience started when they first described a salesperson? I speak to over 50,000 people a year, and I ask people this question all the time. And what they'll tell me is, the number one word that you hear is pushy. Why would you think that people would describe salespeople as pushy? Well, walk into any store in America, I don't care what store you walk into, you'll walk in and the salesperson will come up and say, "May I help you?" And we all respond by saying, "No, thank you, I'm just looking." That is a conversation that happens all the time. "May I help you?" "No, thank you, I'm just looking." Now, why do we say, "No, thank you, I'm just looking"?
We don't want to be pushed
into doing what? Buying something that we don't want. Has that ever happened to anybody in here? Have you ever bought something you didn't want? Raise your hands. I know you have. You see, here's the problem. It happens to us one time, and so therefore we say, well, that isn't going to happen to me anymore. So we say, "No, thank you, I'm just looking." And what does the salesperson usually say then? "My name's Bob. Give me a call if you need me." And Bob will go over and stand in the corner until somebody comes up and says, "Yo, Bob." And Bob will come over and take care of the transaction. And as that person was walking out the door, Bob will say to himself, "Wasn't I good?" And it had nothing to do with Bob. I run a company called Blinds.com. I don't know how many of you ever heard some radio advertisements. But we are the #1 internet company in Houston. We do over $120 million worth of blinds on the internet per year. In fact, when I go to bed at night, about 10 o'clock, by the time I wake up, we will do about $500,000 to $600,000 in sales while we're sleeping. So isn't that a great business? We don't make anything. We don't stock anything. We make it to order. We sell it. We take the order, ship it over to a manufacturer who makes it. The manufacturer will drop ship it straight to the customer, and all we do is keep the difference between the retail and the wholesale price. I got to tell you, if you'd have told me some people would have bought blinds over the internet, I would have told you were nuts. It just is not something I ever thought would happen. But we've grown over the last 6 years from $32 million to $120 million. And what I'm going to show you in the next hour is something that usually takes about 2 days to do. So you're going to have to listen fast, and you have to take some notes, because if you do what I share with you to do, anyone can sell anything, but you have to change your opinion about what happens. Now, let me give you the genesis of what I'm going to share with you, because I've been doing this for a long period of time. I was a consultant to some of the largest companies in America for a long period of time, and I'm a performance improvement specialist. It's kind of what I do. I walk into organizations to help them perform better in short time durations, usually in the world of sales and customer service. And the genesis of all this is something, though, that happened years ago. From the time I was 22 to the time I was 29, I had an insurance and investment kind of company. I started it straight out of school. I worked selling insurance for a period of time. And so one of the companies I represented came up to me and said, well, if you would hire and train people to do what you do, you could make an override commission. So I began to start getting out a calculator, trying to figure out how much I'd make. So I started hiring people, and I made good money. And about 29 years old, I decided to sell it, and I had a bit of money set aside that I could take some time to figure out what I wanted to do in my next life. I was married, I had 3 kids. You know as well as I do, the insurance most of the time is sold in the evening, so you work all day during the day and all in the evening, not much of a family life. So I began to start looking for a job. How many of you have ever been to a job fair? You know what a job fair is? It's where they bring a bunch of different companies all together in one location, and you get to go interview them. Now, I had never had a job other than one I created, So I thought to myself, hey, this should be great. I could go interview with 10 companies. Probably 8 out of 10 would want to hire me. Well, I went to, in Dallas, I went to the job fair, and I put my blue suit and my red tie on, and I walked into a sea of blue suits and red ties. And so I stood in the cattle line where you stand in the line, and by the time you get the guy to interview with them, they're so tired, they don't want to talk to you. And so I did that a couple of times, and I thought, you know, this isn't going anywhere. I really don't like this. So I was standing at the back of the room trying to figure out what I was going to do. And experience had taught me that if I can't find a job, I just create one. So I thought, what am I good at doing? And I thought, well, you know, I put myself through school on speech scholarships. I'm pretty good at making presentations to people, so I'll teach something. And I thought, what would I teach? And I looked up, and I had 2,000 people there that didn't know anything about finding a job. So I thought, great, I will teach them how to find jobs. And I thought, well, wait a minute, I don't know anything about finding a job myself. So I went on a 1-year sabbatical to find out how people found jobs. I went down to the bookstore, read every book on the subject. I began to start experimenting with type style, format, layout, color. Do you know the color of paper can make a difference? I found one color of paper that would pull 2 to 1 over any other color. You know what the color is? Come on, take a guess. Nope, not ivory. Definitely not green. Not brown. Gray, but not any kind of gray, dove gray. Light, creamy gray. And if you held it up to the light and you had a watermark on it, you could boost your response rates by 10%. And so I started getting calls for interviews. And I started going on interviews. Now, what's interesting is every time you go on an interview, you learn something. Would you agree? Well, now you got to admit this. If you don't want a job, it's kind of fun. And so I didn't want a job. I just wanted to find out how people found jobs. So I would go to these interviews with no intention of getting a job. I just wanted to find out how people got jobs. So I tried being very aggressive in interviews, and then very passive interviews. And then at one point I just got up in the middle of the interview and walked out just to see what happened. And the guy chased me down the hallway. And as time went on, I got to the point where I could take the interview completely away from the interviewer. And I began to start figuring out some things that really worked. But there was one thing that began to start keeping me up at night. And that was this whole idea of how do I get them to offer me the job on the spot? If I'm going to go teach people how to do that, better figure that out. And so I know that there are not a lot of you who are TV watchers, and I hate to admit that I was when I was younger. But I was sitting at night watching a TV show called Columbo. Anybody ever seen that? Now, I know I'm dating myself, right? And some of you are victims of the same thing. Okay, so I'm sitting there watching this TV show, Columbo. Now, who is Columbo? He's a detective. He's a fumbling, bumbling kind of disheveled detective who's the smartest guy in the room. And the show starts where the bad guy does something, and it's Columbo's job to figure it out. Now, his job is to get the person to admit they did it when they know they did it, but they don't want to say they did it because if they do, they go straight to jail. Now, tell me that isn't a sales job. To get somebody to admit it. Very little evidence. And so the show follows the same premise every time. The bad guy does something, Columbo comes on the scene, and he starts asking questions of the bad guy. And the bad guy answers the questions. And he walks away, comes back in the middle of the show, asks the bad guy some more questions. This time the bad guy's starting to sweat a little bit because he knows Columbo's getting close. And then he goes away, and at the end of the show, every show, he comes back and he starts peppering the bad guy with questions. And the bad guy's sweating bullets. And just about the time Columbo's going to ask that one question that should nail his hide to the wall, do you remember what he does every show? He walks away. Now just think about this, just the psychology of that. If I'm peppering you with questions, are your defenses high or low? High. What's the likelihood of getting a confession? Not real good. What do I have to do if I'm going to get a confession from you? Get your defenses to drop. So every time he goes, I don't have any more questions. And he physically turns his back on the bad guy. Now if I physically turn my back on you, what do you think? It's over, I'm done. And he does this every show. He walks to the door, and as he gets to the door, he pauses, and he turns around and he says, I have one more question for you. And he always gets the confession. Now, when this happened, I'm telling you, I jumped out of the chair and said, that's it. Scared my family to death. I couldn't wait to go on the next interview. So I went on the next interview. What is a question that always comes near the end of an interview? Do you have any more questions? And I would ask some fairly meaningless, harmless questions. And then the guy would say, any more questions? I said, nope, no more questions. He goes, great. Now, where are his defenses, high or low at this point? Pretty high until I do what? Turn my back. So I got up, shake his hand, I go to the door, and I pause. And I turn around, and I said, by the way, I have one more question for you. Guess what he said? What is it? He always says that. And I came right back with some great bravado. And I want you to see the power in asking questions. Because in just a few minutes, I'm going to take you through some things that's really going to demonstrate what I'm talking about. I came back to the desk. I leaned over that desk. Play along with me, Travis.
All right.
Just stay right there. I would say, Travis, is there anything about me right now that would prevent me from getting this job? Go ahead, answer either way.
No.
Great, when do I start? And they would say, Tuesday? Now, what if he said yes? Do you think I'm prepared?
Sure.
Go ahead. Say, well, yes, as a matter of fact, there is.
Actually, yes.
Well, guess what? This interview ain't over till I say it's over. And I would look at him and say, well, Travis, obviously you have a reason for saying that. May I ask what it is?
I don't like check shirts.
Really? Well, if I can demonstrate to your satisfaction that check shirts actually help me in this job, would you want to know?
Sure.
And I sit right back down and we continue this discussion because it isn't over until I say it's over. You get the idea? The first rule of selling is to understand what sales is and isn't. And it isn't used cars. It isn't the kind of salesmanship that you see in 99% of the equation. I can teach anybody to sell anything, but they have to understand the first rule. And let me share this with you and write it down, and please don't forget it. It's not about the statements you make, but it's about the questions you ask. Does that make sense? When you think about people who sell, most people make statements. They talk about their product. They bore you to death with the things that are meaningless to you because they don't understand what you need. They don't understand what you want. And instead of asking questions, what they do is they make statements. And when you do, life becomes very difficult. Selling isn't something that I do to you, but it's something that we collectively do together. And if we do this, then we know how to sell. And I'm going to show you step by step here how to accomplish this. Anybody ever read a book on selling? What's the two largest chapters always? Closing the sale and handling objections. If you don't like to close the sale, in fact, I've read these books. They talk about the hammerlock close and the Ben Franklin close, like anybody would ever stop long enough and go, I think I'll use the hammerlock close in this kind of conversation. It's ridiculous. It's a question, it's a conversation that comes along through the art of asking great questions and understanding what a customer's needs are. And if you match up your product with what their needs are and you do it in a way they like it, they will buy from you. 5 years ago, Blinds.com was selling $32 million. Today we're doing $120 million in 5 years. Can you imagine that kind of a growth? What's happened to the housing market in the last 5 years? Blind sales are directly connected to the housing market. We've been in a down economy and a down housing market, and we've grown 25% year over year by what I'm about to show you here. So have I got your attention? All right, I really would like for you to pay attention. Now, what you have in front of you is the very thing that I teach large organizations. I have taught GE, I've taught CIBC, the largest bank in Canada, the Hartford Insurance Group, Blinds.com, and a number of companies, what I'm going to show you here. And if you'll pay attention to the things that are on this sheet, you'll have a one-page sheet that you can take along, and if you begin to start studying it and learning it, it can have resounding effect on anything you sell. Fair enough? Shake your head like this and look at your neighbor and say, well, boy, am I glad I came. Now, come on, say that with more enthusiasm, energy, and passion. Yeah, well, I'm kind of glad you came, too. I look kind of foolish up here by myself. All right, let's start here. Everything revolves around what at the center? If the customer's not at the center of every conversation, you lose. In most instances, what is at the center for most people? The product or the company, because that's all they want to talk about. It isn't about your product, and it isn't about your company, and it's not about what you do. It's about what the customer wants. And if you can ever figure this out, it begins to be the center of the part where you begin to start having that kind of conversation that matters most to the customer. The customer doesn't care who you are. The customer doesn't care what you have. What they care about is what's in it for them. Does that make sense? I love these places I go to all the time where they tell me their issues and their problems and why they can't do certain things. And I got to tell you, do I care as a customer? I don't. I don't care about what your issues are. I don't care what your problems are. I don't care how difficult it is. I'm the one with the money. And if you expect me to part with my money, then you have to do something significant in order to be able to get it. Watch this. I don't know. Let's see. Let's see if I have. I think I might have. Yes, I do. I have. Well, I got a $20 bill. I'll give you $20 right now. Ethan, if you can tell me why I should. I'd make you happy. Do you go around giving $20 bills to people and make them happy? I'll give you my $20 right now, John, if you can tell me why I should. I don't want to. I earned this money. It took me a long time to get this money. Andrew, I'll give you my 20 if you can tell me why I should. Because it would make me happy? Do you go around giving $20 bills to everybody because it makes you happy?
Charitable?
Oh, yeah, just every day?
Tax deduction?
Oh, no, I don't need tax deductions. Jesse, can you tell me why I should?
I got a beautiful Unival flex pen.
Oh, I got plenty of pens.
I'm saving up.
Why should I give you, tell me why, I'll give it to you right now.
Because it would help you prove a point to all these people.
It won't help me prove any point. Tim, why should I give you my $20 bill?
Because I can give you a massage.
Ah. Now, don't you find this fascinating? I just spent the first 15 minutes talking about one thing, and that was, it's not the statements you make, but the questions you ask. And how many of you asked me a question? None. You made what? Statements. And if you want my money, you're not going to get it through statements. You're going to get it through questions. Questions. Don't you find this fascinating? It's all at the center of the customer. You know how quickly I'd give you my money? John, if you told me I'll give you $40 for my 20, how quickly would I give you my 20? I'd give it to you right away. I'd give you my money right now if you want to exchange 40 for 20. And you're looking at me going, well, why would I want to do that? You know what? That's how quickly you get people's money if you show them what? Value in what you're exchanging money for. If there's a perception that they will get $40 back for their 20, how quickly will they give you their 20? Fast. But if they perceive they're going to get 10 for their 20, what will happen to the 20? It will get folded right back up, and it will be put right back in the pocket, and they will go somewhere else. Does that make sense? Everything revolves around the customer. And say it with me. It's not the statements you make, but... Okay, let's try that again, because not everybody participated, okay? It's not the... But the... Okay, sit right up in your chair real quick. Put the things down by your side. I want you to do something real simple. I want you to fold your arms, quickly. Fold your arms. Now look to your right and left and see that some people fold their arms the same way you do. Some people fold them differently. I've got two right here. One folds his hands left over right. The other folds hers right over left. How old were you when you decided that left over right was better than right over left? Don't know. Well, how did you decide? What made you decide left over right was right over left?
Since I'm left-handed.
I see it doesn't matter whether you're left-handed or right-handed. I see people, it doesn't matter which way they write as to which way they fold their arms. You know what's interesting is, I don't know when we learn this, I don't know how we do, but once we decide, it's the way we do it forever. Let me prove a point. Put your hands down by your side. Now let's do it this time, but this time let's do it the other way. 1, 2, 3, go. Yeah, some of you are still going around like this. Some of you sitting kind of cockeyed. Now hold it there, and how does it feel? Awkward. How does it feel? Unnatural. How does it feel? Doesn't feel good. Quick, put it back the way you're used to, and you go, oh yeah, woo! How is it that one way feels so good and the other way feels so bad? It's because the way we're used to doing it. And this is the inherent issue with most people. We get into pathways of doing things, and our mind has a very difficult time changing behavior. Did you notice what you had to do when you folded your arms the other way? What did you have to do? You had to think about it. God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a what? Oh my, the ability to think. Are you kidding me? Really? If we're not fearful, we got three things that are at our disposal. We got power, we got the ability to love customers, and we've got the ability to think it through, and it requires conscious thought. And without conscious thought, it's very difficult to do things differently. I know some of you don't come from a sales background, and I know the thought of selling to some of you makes you want to go throw up in the hallway. I get it. But if you don't want to have to go throw up in the hallway by selling, I'm telling you, you come to the right place. But you've got to get the parameters and the skill sets down. This is a skill, but everything revolves around, say it with me, the customer. It's not about the statements we make, but, all right, the first step is this. PSC. PSC stands for probe. First P in PSC, probe. What is probe? Come on, we just said it just a minute ago. Asking questions, that's right. There's two types of probing. The first one is what we call open questions. Open questions are used to uncover customers' needs. And they begin with some very interesting words. I call them the 5 W brothers and the 2 stepsisters. Here's the 5 W brothers. Who, what, when, where, why. Say them with me. Who, what, when, where, why. Now, why would we want to get customers to speak to us freely? That's right. That's the only way we're going to understand their needs. If I start talking to somebody about blinds, and I start talking to them about child safety, and how all these safety features keep a child from getting the cord wrapped around their neck, and I do it for 15 minutes, and they say, well, wait a minute, I don't have any kids. I've just wasted their time, number one, and number two, they aren't interested in what I have to say because I'm not speaking to their what? Their needs. It's not about the statements we make, but the questions we ask. What kind of question would you think you should ask somebody who was interested in buying blinds? I know some of you haven't sold blinds, but this isn't rocket science. Give me some questions that begin with who, what, when, where, why, how, or tell me, 2 stepsisters. Give me questions that begin with those words. What have I used in the past? Very good. What else? I'm sorry, what? Where would I use them? Good. That would be great. How many windows do you have? What else? What am I looking for? Good.
What's the measurements?
What are your measurements?
What color do you
What color would you need? And you see, don't you have to have some level of understanding about what a person's needs are before you can talk to them about your product or service? Yes or no? To just start talking about your product or service is really ridiculous until you find out what their needs are. Does that make sense? So we probe for what? Probe for? Say it. Come on. Probe for? Needs. That's what it is. And we don't stop probing for needs until we have a really good understanding about what the customer wants. Now let me just ask you a question. If you were in a circle of friends, and I came up and I said to you, hi, my name is Steve Riddell. I came up and I said to you, what's he going to think about me? Who is he? Now I come to your other circle of friends and I go, hi, my name is Steve Riddell. What do you do? And how do you do it? And how many children do you have? And what does your family do? And what do you like? And all I do is talk about you. And I walk away, what are you going to think about me? He's the greatest conversationalist in the world. You know why? Because I talked about the thing that you like to talk about more, which is what? No, not you. You. Right? Me. We like to talk about the things about us, but we don't like to sit and listen to somebody drone on about themselves. Would you agree? Then why does it change when we start talking about products? The same rules apply. If I show an interest in you, and the way I show an interest in you is by asking you questions about your needs, your wants, and your desires. And until I know those things, it's pretty ridiculous to start talking about a product or service. Does that make sense? It's not about the statements we make, but the questions we ask. Now, most people can understand questions, but then it's not just asking any question, it's asking the right questions. These kinds of questions uncover customers' needs. Say them with me. Who, what, when, where, why, how, or tell me. If it begins with anything else, it's not an open question, and it's not going to lead you to discovering what the customer's wants and desires are. Now, the other types of questions are called closed-ended questions. Closed-ended questions are questions that confirm customers' needs. They begin with these words. Do, are, is, does, have, has, or. Well, you can't really begin a question with or, but it's like we take MasterCard or Visa, which would you prefer? But it's one of those questions, and by the way, which should be on there, which is another one. But I want you to think about open and closed-ended questions. It's a combination of those two. The more open-ended questions you can ask, the better off you are. Now, there are some open-ended questions that get more of a closed-ended response, which is a one or a two-word response. Something like this. What color is the sky? Blue. Okay, does that get me to talk freely? That's what it's designed to do. So that wouldn't be a great question, would it? Can you think of a question that would get me to talk about my view of the sky? Yes? Yeah, tell me what you think about the sky. That would be much better than what color is the sky, because I would get more of a broader answer. So as you begin to start developing questions, I want you to think of what kind of responses would a customer usually give you. And if it's only a one or two word answer, probably not the best open-ended question you can ask. Does that make sense? Shake your head like this. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to ask open and closed-ended questions, and typically what I would want you to do is to take some time and think through it before you need it. Actually write some good questions down and practice it with somebody. You know, I had to learn this all on my own. When I started learning how to sell insurance, I didn't have anybody to teach me this. And so the only person I could practice on was my wife. And she acted like no customer ever would. She would say the most ridiculous things I've ever heard anybody say. And so in practicing with her, I'd say time out, because she'd say something ridiculous. I'd go, time out. No customer would ever say that. And she said, well, I'm the customer, and if you don't like it, go play with somebody else. Well, I would go, oh, that'd make me mad. So I'd go off and I'd practice and practice. I'd come back. I'd try it on her again, and she'd say some more things that were ridiculous. But I knew I had her when she couldn't think of anything ridiculous that I couldn't handle. And you know what? That's what practice does. And if you can practice it, then when you need it, it becomes really, really easy to do. Make sense? Now, we probe for what? Think about this. We're probing for what? To find out the needs of the customer. Why would we want to know the needs? That's right. So you can think about what your product does. And how do you do it better than anyone else? Because you're going to need to talk about that, but you don't talk about it at first. Let's just pause for a second. John, what do you do? You sell plastic. Okay, what kind of plastic?
Plastic resins, I sell the molders.
Okay, so I call you up, you answer the phone, I say, John, now I want you to think about this. John, do you sell resins? Now remember, it's not in the statements we make, but the questions we ask. Okay, was that a question or a statement? Okay, now I want you to turn it into a question. Do you sell resins?
Yes, I do. What kind would you need?
That's right, look at that. Now why do we ask questions? Find out what the customer's needs. Why else? Keep the customers engaged. Why else?
So you can sell your product.
So I can sell my product. Why else? Get to know them better. Why else? Okay, did anybody say anything you would disagree with? All right, I'm going to give you an insight in here that you'll hear hardly from anyone else. And it's this. Those are true, but there's an underlying reason why we ask questions. Does it make sense to you that if I'm asking you questions, that the conversation is going to go in the direction that I want it to go? Does this make sense? Watch this. Is it Tibor? Yeah. Play along with me, please. Okay? Where are you from? Hungary. How long have you lived there? 39 years. What brought you to our country? Study. And do you see where this conversation is going? Where's it going? Wherever I wanted to go. I could ask any question. He's following along. Now, how does he get it back? He's got to ask me a question. So ask me where I'm from. I'm from Conroe. Have you ever been there?
I cannot answer your question because I don't know.
Exactly. It's in Texas. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
When was the last time you were in Texas? And what's happened? I answered the question, but what did I do? I didn't breathe. Right? I said, yeah, have you ever been there? And boom, it goes right back where I wanted to go. I learned this through interviewing. They say to me, they say, well, tell me about yourself. I said, well, what would you like to know? They said, well, how about your work history? I said, is work history important here? Well, absolutely. Well, why? Well, because blah, 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 blah. And I'd get them talking. It's not about the statements you make, but what? The questions you ask. Parents, listen to me. It is not with your children about the statements you make, but what? The questions you ask. And if you ask the right questions, you learn volumes about your children that they would never tell you by making statements. Does this make sense? Your children are the greatest salespeople in the world. You were too. Mom, can I go to Susie's house? No. Why not? Because I don't want you. How come? Because it's dark. Why? And all you knew pretty much was one question. Why? And if you ask it 5 times in a row, she'd finally say, okay, just go. Cha-ching, sold. But we get older and we forget these things, okay? Probing. All right. Everybody got this? Probing, open probes are used to do what? Say it with me. To what? Uncover customers' needs. Now say it with me. Ready? To what? Uncover customers' needs. Okay, you young people in this room, open your mouth. It works kind of like that. I say it, you say okay. Here we go. What are open-ended questions designed to do? To uncover customers' needs. That's what they do. And the better the question, the more needs that will happen. And customers will try to sucker you into answering questions, and it usually goes right down a rat hole. They do it to us all the time. They call up and say, I want to talk about blinds, but let me ask you, do you sell faux wood blinds? And I got people who go, oh, we got faux wood blinds, we got wood blinds, we got, and they just launch. And I just call it the launching of the grenade, because nothing's going to happen but blowing up the customer and blowing up the opportunity. Why? Because we're making statements and we're not asking questions. If somebody said, do you sell faux wood blinds, I say, is that what you want? Let me just share something with you, how by not answering one question saved me $500,000. Can you imagine? I used to be a consultant, and I walked in and I made a big presentation to a CEO about why they should hire me. And right in the middle of signing a $500,000 contract, he pauses. And he looks up at me and he says, I have one question for you before I finish this. I said, what is it? He said, do you teach people to follow scripts when you're training them? How would you answer that?
Do you want me to follow it?
You're learning something. Now, if you weren't experienced in this, you would lose $500,000. Let me tell you what happened. Now, do I teach people to follow scripts when I'm training them? Well, yeah, they don't know what to do and don't know how to say it and don't know what to say. Yeah, I help them out. I write it out for them, and that way they know what to say. And we learn it, and we memorize it. But scripts can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And I looked at him and I said, well, you know, experience has taught me that there's always something behind every question. So what's behind this one? And I mean, he launched. He said, if this is about scripts, if you come in and do that, the last person who came in, that's what they did. If I destroyed my company, I would never do business with somebody who taught people how to do scripts. I said, well, you'll be happy to know that's not what I do. Scripts to him were something completely different than how I would even employ it. But by answering the question before you know why it's being asked can be a very dangerous thing. And this is why it's so important to understand it's not about the statements we make, but it's all in the questions we ask. And if we learn how to ask the right questions, you get an amazing result. You ask the wrong questions, you lose. Make sense? Now here's what happens though. And this is where it gets very interesting. Because if we ask the right question, we learn about their needs. And then there's something that comes just before we start talking about our product or service that actually completely changes the whole receptivity as to how people respond to us. Let me just fill in the blanks. We buy from people we... That's right. We buy from people we like. We buy from people we... Okay, which one comes first, like or trust? Like. If I don't like you, certainly I'm not going to trust you. Does that make sense? So like comes first, trust comes second. So you've got to be likable and you've got to be trustworthy. Does that make sense? Likability and trustworthiness. That doesn't come just by something you say, but it's a process by which happens in that relationship. And there's got to be a relationship established or somebody's not going to want to buy from you. And so as we ask questions, what happens to likability? We're asking the right questions. Does it go up or should it come down? It should increase, right? Likability should increase if I'm asking great questions. And the more you're answering my questions, the more you're sharing with me your needs, likability is going up. And so you're in the role of a salesperson. Remember what I said before. When somebody comes in and says, when you go into a store and they say, may I help you? What do you usually say? No, thanks, I'm just looking. You're afraid they're going to try to sell you something you don't want. Anybody you encounter, you should always have that at the forefront. Even though they walked in your store, they're still concerned about the fact that you may try to sell them something that you don't want. So what you have to do is you have to begin the process of moving out of the role of the salesperson and into the role of the consultant. Does that make sense? Give me words that describe a counselor. What's that? Listener. Yes. What else? Counselor. Friendly. What else? Caring. What else? See, these are words that are completely different from the way you describe a salesperson. Salesperson are slick, pushy. Counselors have my best interest at heart. And there's a way to move yourself over into this position, but you have to do it by asking great questions and then doing something I'm going to show you right now. We probe for needs. Say it with me. We probe for needs. Right after we have a good understanding about what the customer wants, there's something that comes right up there in that pink box or that purple box. It's something called permission. Permission. Permission to do what? To actually tell them. Have you ever been called at dinner time when you didn't want to be called by a telemarketer? Has that ever happened to anybody? Now, watch this. It's really interesting. You've got the phone to your ear. Are you hearing anything they have to say? No. Why not? You're interrupting my dinner. But what if what they had to say could really help you? Do you care? No. Because I've got the phone to my ear. Am I listening? No. Now the only thing that would pique my listening is for them to do what? To engage me. Does that make sense? If I'm engaged, I'm going to listen. If I'm not engaged, I'm not listening. So it's the engaging process. Have you? Who in here has like a 2-year-old? You got a 2-year-old? What's your 2-year-old's name? Jude. Jude. Ha. Has Jude ever acted up in public when you didn't want him to? Never. What if Jude was acting up and I came over to you and said, you know, if you were a better father, I could really help you to understand how to take care of Jude. Would you want to hear what I had to say? Why not? I just insulted him. So he's not going to want to perk up and listen. But what if he came to me and he said, Steve, I'm having trouble with Jude. I don't know what to do. Is it then okay for me to tell him? Would he listen? Why? Because he asked for the information. Does that make sense? The key to engaging people is to get them to ask for the information. Now we think just because they walked into our store or they said they were interested in our product, that somehow that's a level of interest that causes us to be able to tell them. Not true. So here's what I want you to write down. There's one question, if you could ever learn this, and I'm telling you word for word, don't change it. If you change it, I'll haunt you forever. Okay? It goes like this. If I could show you a way that you could blank, 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 would that be of interest to you? If I could show you a way that you could blank, 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 would that be of interest to you? If I could show you a way that you could blank, 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 would that be of interest to you? Now, what goes in the blanks? Their needs. Excellent. So we learn their needs, and then we say, if I could show you how you get a light filtering shade that would let the light come in, but keep people from looking in your house and provide you with the kind of security you want at a price you could afford, would that be what you'd want to do? Would that be of interest to you? And what happens when they say yes? What have they just done? Oh, I think they've done something better than that. What's the one word that salespeople love the most? It's called yes. Anytime I can get the customer to say yes. My goal is to get you to say yes, 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 all the way through. If you say yes to me all the way through, then when I say, well, do you want to buy? You're not going to say no at the end. There's no closing that has to happen. There's nothing that has to occur. But the only way I can get you to say yes is to do what? Ask questions. Does that make sense? So there's a permission question that goes like this. If I could show you a way that you could blank, 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 would that be of interest to you? Now, I want you to get a little practice with this. So turn to your neighbor beside you and fill in the blanks of any product that you sell and sound convincing. Okay? This is like your Oscar-winning time here, okay? Look at your neighbor and tell them that, okay? Come on. Okay, I don't have a lot of time here for practice, but you get the idea. Now, some of you were high-fiving each other. I don't know if you're high-fiving each other because you did it well or not, but hey, it sounds good to me. If I could show you a way that you could blank, 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 would that be of interest to you? And it's lovely when the customer says, well, yeah. Now what do? I tell them. And that's the time to begin to start talking about it. But it's done in a very specific way. Now, I was at this large bank in Canada, and this lady came up to me, and they were selling banking products over the phone, checking accounts, credit card accounts, things of that nature. She comes up to me, she says, I've got a bone to pick with you. I said, what's the problem? She said, I can't ask that question. I said, what question? Oh, that if I could show you a way question. Why not? It just sounds cheesy. Well, why does it sound cheesy? I don't know. Every time I say it, it sounds cheesy. Well, I said, well, if there was a way to ask the question where it wouldn't sound cheesy, would you want to know? She said, well, yeah. I said, I just did. Now, don't mess with me, okay? Why is it that when I ask the question, it doesn't sound cheesy, and when you do, it does? She said, I don't know. I said, I do, because I practice and you don't. You got to learn it one way. If you can learn it one way, I can teach you 100 ways to ask the question. Do you get the idea? If I could show you a way that you could blank, 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 would that be what you'd want to do? Would that be of interest to you? Would that be what you'd want? There's 100 ways to do it. But learn one way. And if you learn one way, it can teach you a ton of ways to ask the question where it does work. Does that make sense? Now, it causes the person to say yes. And when they say yes, then you go to the next stage of the PSE model. The PSE model stands with S, so P stands for what? Say it with me. P stands for what? Probes are used to do what? We're getting their needs done two ways. We ask two kinds of probes. What are they? Open and closed. Very good. And then after we get their needs, we get a permission question in there. Here's the next one. We solve. S stands for solve. Your job is to solve their problem. If you can solve a person's problem, they'll want to buy from you. And if they see value in it, even better. Now, how do we do that? Well, there's two steps to solve. The first one is we acknowledge the customer's needs. Now, something very easy to do. If I said to you, if I could show you a way that you could get a light filtering shade at a price that you could afford, would that be of interest to you? And they say, well, yeah, that would be. And I say, well, I can understand why you'd want that. Because many of our customers have found value in the same kind of thing. Now, there's 3 F's up there that stand for this: feel, felt, found. Say them with me. Feel, felt, found. If you can just remember feel, felt, found, it kind of gives you a track to run on in how you say it. I can understand how you feel. Many of our customers have felt the same way. May I share with you what they've found? Isn't that easy? Okay, say it with me. I can understand how you feel. Many of our customers have felt the same way. May I share with you what they've found? And that's your time to go blah, 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 blah. You tell them. This is the time to put on display what it is you can do, but the problem is we come back to the same issue of it's not in the statements you make, but in the questions you ask. If I'm going to make a statement, I need to end it with what's called a tie-down. I want you to write a tie-down. A tie-down. A tie-down is 2 words placed at the end of a statement that turns the statement into a question. Fair enough? See, that was a tie-down, wasn't it? Oops, there was another one, isn't it? Ooh, you couldn't stop me from using them, could you? We could go all day using them, couldn't we? This is fun, isn't it? Tie-downs are great, aren't they? Do you see the point? Any statement can be followed by a tie-down, 2 words placed at the end of a statement that turns the statement into a question. Why would I want to do that? It forces a response of what? Yes. If I can get you to say yes over and over and over again, and you like it, you'll naturally go with me. And if you don't like it, you'll let me know, and then it's time for me to change my behavior. Does that make sense? The worst thing in the world is just go blah, 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 all the way, and then they go, well, no, I didn't really want it. And you go, oh, I knew it. This is what happens all the time in selling. It's not the statements we make, but the questions we ask. So we go to the first one. I understand how you feel. Many of our customers have felt the same way. May I share with you what they found? And this is number 2. You introduce the appropriate features and benefits with value that satisfies what their what? Satisfies what? Their needs. Right over here, their needs. It's all connected to their needs. We don't talk about anything else. We talk about their needs. The lawn care business. If I could show you how you get your lawn mowed at a price you could afford with great service following it, would that be what you'd want to do? Well, yeah. I can understand how you feel. Many of my customers feel the same way. May I share with you what they found? I have a whole list of recommendations from people all across this city that would be happy to recommend my services and tell you how great I am. Fair enough? There was a tie-down, wasn't it? Oops, there it is again, isn't it? These are fun, aren't they? Yes. Yes, see? And everybody's head's going, oh yeah, 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 oh yeah, yeah. See, and that's all you want is a head shake, up and down, right? Now, don't you find it fascinating? When I've been doing this quite a bit here. And guess what I've got almost the entire audience doing when I'm doing this? Now that I'm telling you, you're trying not to do it, several of you are still doing it, right? If I stand in front of an audience and I just keep doing this, I'll get most of the audience doing this. I can get people to agree with me just doing this. Okay? Now, it's funny, if you don't agree with me, you won't do this. You're not going to sit in the audience and go, but you'll do this. Agreement is one of those powerful things, and if it's connected to value, it really makes a difference in selling. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to talk to them about the features and benefits with value that we have, and then we're going to be looking for something very important, which is called a buying signal. What does a buying signal sound like? Can anybody tell me? What's that? Yeah, does that come in red? Can I get that by Tuesday? What other kind of buying signals? What's that?
Could you be here tomorrow?
Could I be here tomorrow? Yes. What credit card do you take? Don't you find this fascinating? I hear people say this all the time, and I hear salespeople go, well, let me tell you all about the, and they go right back telling them all the time. When you hear something that indicates that they are ready to proceed, it's time to proceed. Does that make sense? And you listen for a buying signal. Now, here's what's interesting, though. You don't proceed by putting the whammy on people. Sales does not come by what I do to you, but what we do together. And by the way, customer service and sales follow the exact same procedures. Take a look at this. The last step of this is C. What do you think C stands for? No. That's the cheesy side of selling. C stands for commitment. What I'm looking for is to get a commitment from the customer. Now, how many yeses should I have by now? Several. Every time I get a yes, is that a commitment? Yes or no? Yeah. If I'm getting commitments like this, I've been getting commitments from you all the way along. I've been getting you to commit. I've been saying, shake your head, okay? Yeah. And I've been getting you to do that, okay? So commitments come in the form of yeses. And at the end, what should we do to get a commitment? Well, there's something very specific that we should do. Now, I've been wanting this Harley Davidson for a long time. I've gone down the Harley Davidson shop and I've looked at this red Harley Davidson, and every time I'm there, I leave drool marks all over it. And I've been there at least 12 times. I know I have. And every time, now the guy starts treating me with disdain, because what am I to him? I'm like a tire kicker, right? I don't buy, I just come and look and make drool all over this Harley Davidson. Now, last time I went to go look at a motorcycle, I wound up with my wife looking at motorcycles and came back with a red Suburban. So that did not work out real well for me. So I haven't gone with her lately, but at some point in time, I'm going to have the courage to go buy this motorcycle. But so far, she just does not want me to do that. So I just go by and I drool all over it. Now, what would this guy have to do to get me to buy? The closer we get to making a purchasing decision, what happens to our thought process? We go from all the reasons why we should buy to all the reasons why we should not buy. Does that make sense? How many of you gone and look at cars? Oh, let's go look at cars. Wonderful. It's fun to go look at cars until you actually have to pay for one. And the closer you get to actually physically reaching in your pocket and pulling out the money and giving it to somebody, our mind will go from all the reasons why we should do something to all the reasons why we should not. What has to occur here is that you replace the reasons why they say they shouldn't with all the reasons why they said they should. Not what you said, but what they said. Where do you get that from? All the things they said yes to. Does that make sense? So the first step of commit is to say this. Let's go back and review what you said was important. You said that blocking out all the light in your window was important. And as we've discussed, getting blackout on the back side of your shades will completely black out all the light and will help you sleep at night. Okay? And they'll go, oh yeah, okay. And you said that getting something that was aesthetically pleasant would be really important to you. And the one we picked out, you say would look really lovely in your bedroom, right? And they go, oh yeah, that's right. And we talked about the fact that economy was important, but that you would be willing to spend a little more money to get the kind of look you want. And this shade is both economical and it comes in at a right price point. Fair enough, Mike? And you go, fair enough. That's all you got to do. Just go back and review what they said was important and get agreement with them that what they said was important. And what happens is they will revert from all the reasons why they said they shouldn't back over to all the reasons why they did it in the first place. Let me tell you something. Every time I get ready to go buy a motorcycle, guess what I think? What comes to mind? Wife! I'll be sleeping in the barn with the motorcycle. That would not be good. And so I don't buy. Does that make sense? So as the closer we get to the buying decisions, we'll go to all the reasons why we shouldn't. And you know what? If you're going to help them make an informed decision, you got to get them back over to all the reasons why they said they should. Does that make sense? And then the last one is simply an ability to be able to establish an action plan requiring their commitment. Which is, we take MasterCard or Visa, which would you prefer? We can have that installed by next Tuesday, or Thursday, which would you like? And if you are here, you notice I didn't say anything about handling objections. I didn't say anything about closing the sale. You know what, I read a book a long time ago called Spin Selling. If you haven't read that book, I would suggest you pick it up. I'm not sure I agree with everything in the book, but the one thing I do agree with is this. And he comes up with this thesis. He went on 53,000 sales calls. Observed, how many of you would be willing to go look at like 53,000? I wouldn't. But he went and observed a ton of sales calls. And he came to the conclusion that said this. In his observation, that if an objection came up anywhere in the conversation, that the likelihood would be that the sale would not be consummated. He said it's far better to get into a pattern of objection prevention rather than objection handling. Do such a good job at the front end of that sales presentation that the sale just naturally takes care of itself. And I will tell you, it makes a world of difference. I have been in every single Nordstrom's in North America. How many of you have ever gone to Nordstrom's? I'm a student of Nordstrom's. I used to speak professionally for years across a wide range of audiences. I'd ask, name a department store that every time you go in, you just love the experience. And every time somebody would say Nordstrom's. And so I was in San Francisco. I'd never been in one. I passed by one, and there was a Nordstrom's. And I said, stop the cab. And I jumped out, had a credit card in hand. And I went in, and I said, if people think this is great, I'm going to go in and buy something. So I walked in with credit card in hand. I walked in and bought, I wanted to buy a tie. So the guy came up to me and said, may I help you? I said, yes, I'm here to buy a tie. He goes, great, we have 1,000 ties. What kind of tie would you like? I said, nope, you just make the recommendation, and I'll just buy it. He goes like, well, I got to know something. Nope, you just tell me which tie to buy, and I'll buy. I just want to see what you do. And I'm telling you, the guy spent 40 minutes like picking out fine art to try to find the tie that would be good for me. And every time he tried to ask me a question, I wouldn't answer it, just to see what he'd do. And finally, he came up with a tie. He said, here's what I think you should do. I said, great. And so I bought it, and he did something very amazing. He went behind the counter, took care of the transaction, and instead of standing behind the counter and handing it to me, he walked out from behind the counter, he walked out in front of the counter, and he said, play along. I want to thank you for shopping at Nordstrom's. It's been a pleasure waiting on you. And I went, wow, that was amazing. And I did it again, and somebody did the same thing, and I thought, somebody's really training these people. I went to the grand opening of Nordstrom's in Dallas. I walked into the shoe department. This guy comes up and says, may I help you? And I responded by saying, no thanks, I'm just looking. And he said, great, we like people who look. Let me ask you, have you ever tried on a pair of Santonis? I said, no, never have. I wouldn't know a Santoni from a Baloney, so never have. He said, well, if you had, you'd remember it because it's the most comfortable shoe in America today. What would you say? I said, show them to me. So he said, come on. And as we're walking over to the shoe department, he said, let me ask you, if you were going to buy shoes today, would they be black or brown? I said, well, I'm not buying shoes today, but black. He said, well, would that be a tie-up or a loafer? And I said, well, I don't wear tie-up shoes, so loafers. He said, would that have a high heel or a low heel on it? I said, well, this is not exactly like the 70s when we had platform shoes, so, you know, low heel. But I'm not buying shoes today. He said, that's okay. He said, let me ask you, would that have a tassel or no tassel on it? I said, well, I like tassels. And so he goes, here we are. And what do you think he pulled off the shelf? A black tasseled, low-heeled loafer. He said, look, you wear about an 8.5 or 9, right? I said, yeah, that's right. He said, put this on. I think you'll be most comfortable. And I looked at it, and I remember going, how do you know? So I put it on. I went, ooh, this feels good. Yes. Mm-hmm. Man, those are comfy. And what's the next logical question? How much do these shoes cost? I said, well, those are nice. Yeah, your feet feel like $1 million. Yeah, they would. So how much do these shoes cost? Without blinking an eye, he said, $300. Oh, $300? Took him out. He said, no, I'd never buy a pair of shoes for $300. I've never bought a pair of shoes for $300 in my life. I'm not about to start now. I said, besides, look at that sole. And I'd have that thing worn out in no time at all. I had one of those real thin soles. He said, now, wait a minute. He said, let me tell you what Santoni's done. They've taken a real thick sole like a wingtip, and they compressed it so tightly it wears like iron. You get a thin sole feel, thin sole feel with a thick sole wear. I said, okay. So how long will these shoes last? He said, well, how long do you want them to last? I said, I'm a little lost in this conversation. It's now not how long I want them to last, it's how long will they last? He said, well, let me tell you. He said, I don't mean to be flippant, but if you think these shoes ought to last you for like 3 years and they don't, here's what I'll do. I'll refund your money or I'll replace the shoes. Fair enough? And I walked out of there with a $300 pair of Santonis. I was like, and I was going to the parking lot, yeehaw, yeehaw, and then I stopped and I went, oh! He just got me to spend more money than I've ever spent on shoes in my life, and I liked it. So I ran to the car, I got a piece of paper. He said, I said, he said, I said, he said, I said, I bought, I go, yeehaw, yeehaw. I was like, ah. All the way home, I'm just thinking about this guy, and then the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I went, whoop! What am I going to tell my wife? But I had it by the time I was home. I said, honey, they're an investment. I was so enamored with this guy. I go back to Dallas and I watch him the entire day. And guess what he did the entire day? Everybody who came in, he said, may I help you? Everybody responded by saying, no, thank you, I'm just looking. And every time he'd say, that's okay. Let me ask you, have you ever tried on a pair of Santonis? I called the senior vice president for North American sales. I talked to the guy and I said, here's what I do. I speak all over the country. I've been in every Nordstrom's. Let me ask you, I asked about this guy. And he said, and when I told him the guy's name, the senior vice president, he kind of chuckled. He goes, I said, what's so funny? He goes, well, we send him to all of our grand openings. I said, well, of course you do. He said, he's the #1 seller of Santonis in the world. Of course he is. That's all he recommends. But here's what's interesting. This guy makes $120,000 a year selling shoes. Folks, you know how to sell. There's not any other skill I know that trumps it, because life is a sale. God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of 3 things. Power from above, love for customers, and an ability to think it through. I put in your hand right now what people pay me a lot of money to give to them. And if you will study this, and you will begin to start using this as a template for understanding how to go through the process of having a conversation with a customer where they would like you, they like the product, and it benefits their life, they will naturally want to buy from you. But it's the way in which you do it that makes the difference. Say it with me. It's not in the questions, statements you make, but in the what? Questions you ask. Does that make sense? Look at your neighbor and say, boy, am I glad I came. Now say it with more excitement than that. I'm glad you came too, because if you hadn't, I would have looked foolish up here by myself. Thank you very much.